Okay, is that better?
That is better. Yeah, that's actually great. Thank you.
Okay.
Just before I start, Julie, I'm just going to do an acknowledgement of country.
Yes, please.
I respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, this space where we are meeting this evening. The Menang people have been here on their Noongar Budja for thousands of years. The connection they share with this place we call the Great Southern runs generations deep. It is with great respect that I acknowledge the Menang people and their elders past, present and emerging. It's a real privilege for us to be here tonight, to come together on this space. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Julie, for being here with us.
My pleasure.
What country are you coming to us from?
Well, I acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Brinja, Yuin, Walbanga people of South Coast New South Wales, but my true country is Burruberongal country from Darug Nation on the Hawkesbury River.
So where you're living at the moment, what's that area like?
It's South Coast New South Wales. It's beautiful. It's a bit like, not quite as beautiful as Denmark over in West Australia, but getting close to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's very pretty. Lots of really good surf that my husband likes to surf. And yeah, it's lovely. Well, we had shocking bushfires a few years ago, but
Yeah.
our wildlife has suffered terribly. But you're familiar with bushfires yourself over there in West Australia, that's for sure.
Yeah, we absolutely are. Yeah, and you, I was reading today that you spent quite a bit of time along the Darling River in your youth. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I did. I lived an entire year there when I was only 22, and that had a profound effect on me. But we can talk about that as we talk about, answer some of your questions about the genesis of the novel and where it came from.
Sure,
Because that
sure.
year I spent on the Darling River in a town called Burke, but basically changed me forever. And I think that was when I began to, maybe that's when the first ideas for Madukka the River Serpent happened. It's a very,
Right.
very, very
Wow.
long time ago.
Yeah. So, well, I'll start with these questions then.
Okay.
So, growing up, what was your relationship to reading and storytelling?
Okay. Well, we lived in a housing commission house in the bush in Sydney. Dad was an Aboriginal man. Mum was of English descent. Mum had a great belief that education could get you out of poverty, and we were really poor. And she'd been denied education, and Dad had only been to school for about 5 years, and Mum too. So she used to walk up with a pram all the way up to Gladesville, which was about 4 kilometres, 5 kilometres uphill, pushing a pram and fill it up with books from the library and push it back down. So we always had books in the house, and we were encouraged to read, and we were encouraged to get an education and to study words and learn vocabulary just to improve our minds, because she didn't want us to have to go through what she had to go through.
Yeah. Was it a bilingual household?
No.
No.
Dad, well, we live in Sydney, which is, ground zero for invasion of Australia, and
Yeah.
The Darug language. I've only learned a lot of Darug language later on in life by studying dictionaries and versions of the language that was recorded. There's no complete dictionary of Darug, but I do like to use language within my novels. I think it's important to support the learning of languages that have been, well, dying out really. And if we don't bring them back as writers and readers, then those languages won't exist.
Yeah, I agree. So, what kind of authors do you enjoy reading?
Well, when I was a little girl, I read things like, I was just looking at your wonderful questions. I read things like everybody read, Black Beauty, The Secret Garden. We read those American and English books mostly. Bib and Bub, Australian books as well. When
Yeah.
I was a little girl. What's his name? The koala. Can't remember his name.
Blinky Bill.
Yeah, Blinky Bill.
Yes.
And the magic pudding. I thought was fantastic, especially because
that was fabulous.
I got to see the Tin Tookies. The Tin Tookies were marionettes which performed and that was the beginning of me thinking, oh, theatre, because I had an aunt who was an actress. An aunt on the English side of the family was an actress, and we used to go and see her in pantomimes. And
Oh, wow.
at a very early age, I thought, oh, theatre, that's really exciting. It's much more interesting than normal life. So it
Yeah.
little seeds of ideas. But I was always a really big reader. And strangely enough, by the time I was about 13, I'd go up to the library, and the books I would take out, I started to read every single play in the library from A through to Z. And
Oh, wow.
I read Eugene O'Neill and Tennessee Williams and Ray Lawler.
Wow.
Look, I must have been a bit odd because I was only about 13 or 14, but I really liked reading plays, and maybe that put the seeds of why later on I became a playwright. Mm.
Yeah. So, what kind of authors do you enjoy now?
Well, I was just thinking about that when you sent me the questions. I most recently been reading a bit of Kim Mahood. I really like her work, Wandering with Intent and Position Doubtful. She writes kind of essays or extended pieces. So, Position Doubtful is an extended piece about working in art, but working with desert Aboriginal people across
Yeah.
Australia and out on the Great Sandy Desert and places like that. And she's had a lifetime of living with Aboriginal people and working with them as a cartographer, mapping land for
Oh, wow.
land rights reasons and for ceremonial reasons. So she's a white woman, that's for sure, because her parents were cattle managers, but she had the opportunity of going out on cattle drives with all Aboriginal drovers
Yeah.
and learning language. And so, I find her books fascinating. She's fabulous. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, sorry, would you mind repeating that author's name?
Sure.
A
Actually, I
few
have
of our members want to write
yeah,
it
yeah.
down.
Kim Mahood, Mahod. Kim
Did you
Mahood.
get that one? Yep,
Yeah.
Kim Mahood.
Yeah, and Position Doubtful is her one that's combines cartography, art, and relationships with remote Aboriginal communities in a really joyful way, celebrating
Yeah.
the love and friendship that can be built through a lifetime of an association with one community, and appreciating like me, being adopted into a traditional moiety system and having a place, which is what happened to me when I went to live in Arnhem Land. I was adopted and became a Gullian, and means forever. You've got that relationship with those families up there in
Wow.
Yolngu country, yeah,
Yeah.
and your children and your husband and your mother.
Wow. I don't think you can hear the audience very clearly, but I should have done this earlier. Everyone, a big round of applause for Julie so that she knows that there's a bunch of them here.
Thank you.
So the way that we've got our system set up, it's this face you get to see. I'm sorry, but there is a sea of lovely people here.
Lovely.
It just kind of, just because we then film the interaction and then it goes on our YouTube channel. So lots
great.
of other people will get to see this talk as well.
Great.
So Julie, you're a poet, a playwright,
Yeah.
and a writer of historical fiction and much more, I'm sure. What led you to writing and becoming a published author?
Look, it's really hard to get published, and I'm sure there are people in your there in the room today who've got secret novels or something that they've tried to get published. We just know it's extremely difficult. But these days it's not so hard to do some self-publishing. And after a couple of my novels got rejected by every major publisher in Australia, which is fine, I decided I would put my money where my mouth was and I would publish one myself. I've still got boxes of that book in the garage books, and my husband says he's going to build a retaining wall out of them, put concrete on them. But it was good because then friends read it, and also I'd go to libraries and I'd be a bit sassy and just kind of promote myself, and people would buy the books, and then eventually I hit I sent a book to Magabala, which was Benevolence. And it took them about 4 years to publish it, but the wonderful Rachel Bin Salah.
This one here.
Yeah, Rachel Bin Salah, who's the one of the editors there. They say editor, but they really mean publisher. She took it under her wing and gave me a lot of advice and a lot of editorial advice, and I learned a lot through working with Rachel and Margaret Wiskin and some of the other editors that she gave me, and I was able to bring out Benevolence, and it did really well as a historical novel based on the stories of that I knew from the Hawkesbury River from my 3 times great grandma and her life.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so I'm not interested in writing memoir or history of my family either, but I do find I get some inspiring stories by looking on Trove and some amazing stories, which is just kind of like finding out that possibly 3 times great grandfather was a reverend in the Anglican Church.
Yeah, right.
Like
Wow.
it was like, oh, okay, now there's a story.
Yeah. So, what inspired you to write Madukka the River Serpent?
Well, I was working on I was going to do another historical novel after Benevolence. The Benevolence got picked up by HarperCollins. It was published in the United States and UK. So it went really well, and which was really nice. And I got shortlisted for quite a lot of awards, the VOS and the anyway, quite a few awards. And so I thought I'd write another historical novel, like a sequel, but I was kind of exhausted. Historical novels require a great deal of research, and that can be, it's quite time, it uses up a lot of time and a lot of mental energy sifting through all that historical information to find your story. And I thought, oh, in the meantime, I'd write something that was just based on a play that I'd written back in the 1980s called Gungies. Gungies means the police, Gungible, constable. And I had this play that had been on at Belfast Street Theatre. And I always loved that play. It actually gets performed every year at WAPA in West Australia. Yeah, by the students. So
Yeah.
I only found that out recently, and I was like, "Oh, I wish someone had told me. I would have gone over and seen it," but nobody told me. And so I took that play and I basically sent it to a typist and got her to type it out. And then I began to work on that, and it formed the basis of a book called River of Bones, which was about the death of the Darling River. So it had a death. I'm not going to tell too much about it because I do want people to read it. But there was a death in the book which seemed to me metaphorical for the death of the Darling River, because I spent some time on the Darling River in 2020 and there was no river. The river was gone. There was just no river. It had been completely sucked dry by the cotton farmers and the almond farmers, and drought as well, and over harvesting of the water and over allocation of water by the government. So, you can't just point your finger at one person. It's a complex ecological disaster affecting everything from Queensland right down to South Australia. And I got really angry and upset about that. And I thought, well, I'm not a politician, but I can write a book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, River of Bones is a separate book itself, is it?
No, that was the original title for
That was the original. Okay, yeah. I wasn't sure if I got confused with that. So that was and that came from your experience of going back to the river and what you saw.
Yeah, but I wrote this kind of social history novel, which and I sent it off to a few publishers. No, not interested again. I thought, oh, here we go again, not being able to get published.
Yeah.
And I had an agent by then, and she said, oh, look, I've sent it out to a few people. They're not interested, she said. And I was like, oh, okay. And it breaks your heart because you spent years and years on them.
Yeah.
And so I was working with an editor called Kate Galsworthy, and she and I both at the same time came up with the idea that it would make a good crime novel. And I went away and worked on it for 6 months, and I sent it back to her, and she said, no, it's not working. Go back to the social history novel. And I said, I've just spent 6 months turning this novel into a crime novel. I'm sorry, I can never go back. And so and then I sent it to UWAP, and within a few weeks they wrote back and said, we're making you an offer. And I was like, oh, glory.
That's awesome. Oh, round of applause for that. That's awesome. Yeah, that's really awesome.
They were great. They were just so good and so enthusiastic. And Eleanor Hurt worked there at that time, but Kate Pritchard, Pickard works, is the boss there now, fabulous person too. And I said, oh, I suppose you'll need a lot of editing because, I spent 4 years editing with Mugabala for Benevolence. And Eleanor Hurt said, oh, no, it's perfect just as it is.
Wow.
And I nearly burst into tears because, these are your babies, you work so hard on it. I said, are you sure? And she said, oh, it'll need a really good solid copy edit. There's a few time frames that are a bit I'm not very good at time and dates. I tend to, forget about that. And anyway, so they gave it a brilliant copy edit, like, a really efficient copy edit. And then it was time. They said that we want to talk to you about the title. And I was like, no, And they said, well, we're going to give you a list of titles that come straight out of the book, right? straight out of the book,
Right.
which is the way we choose titles, you know, when you've got a finished novel. If you're not
Yeah.
sure, you work with a working title, and then if you want something better, you'll find it in your own writing. Anyway,
Yeah, okay.
they gave me a big long list, and they came out, what about when, you know, when June, Auntie June says, oh, it's, you know, the rise of Madukka the River Serpent out of the river. And they said, we
Yeah.
love that. And what about calling it Madukka? And I said, no, Madukka the River Serpent. That's the perfect.
Yeah.
So I was very
Oh, I
pleased.
just got goosebumps.
Yeah. And of course, they did
Yeah.
a brilliant cover, just
Oh,
beautiful.
isn't it stunning? Yeah,
Yeah.
we've got a whole bunch of them here, and it really is beautiful. And this was Lisa White.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
right? Lisa
Apparently, yeah. I've never met
So,
her. Yeah.
did you have input in the cover selection?
Well,
or...
you don't really get. I don't know if anyone else in the room is an author. My experience is that you get very little choice about a cover. A publisher just says, "Well, this is what we're going for," and they might
Yeah.
say, "Do you like it?" And if you say no, they say, "Too bad."
Yeah, right.
But in this case, I said, "No, I love it," and they gave me various versions to choose from. One of them was just all pink and didn't have any of the green and didn't have any leaves. And I said, "No, I really like those leaves, and I like that kind of teal color." And
Yeah.
and so that's what we went for. I'm really pleased. And then they said, "Oh, we love this cover because it'll be good for the series." And I went, "Pardon?"
What?
The series. They said, "Oh, we don't think Auntie June's finished solving crimes yet. I think she's got a lot more crimes to go."
Do you know, we would be so happy if Auntie June came back, because she's gone on to Sydney. Yeah, she's got loads to do. Yeah. So you'd have a lot of support over here if it came back as a series.
Well, you know, I think she should go to some mining towns. I think she should go up to Adani, up near the reef in Queensland, and maybe over to West Australia, where mining's happening, where people aren't happy about it. You know, and sometimes, you know, if we didn't have mining, we wouldn't have any metal. I mean, you know, I'm not an idiot. You know, I understand that mining, but sometimes when it infringes on, especially on Aboriginal land and Aboriginal sites, I really think we have to think very seriously about how that goes about. Yeah.
Yeah. So characters, so mainly the main 5 characters came from Gunji's, your play.
Yeah, they did.
So as a creative, how does that feel then, to take characters from one art form that you've written for a play and develop them for another art form, a novel? How was that experience?
Well, it's actually fantastic if you're taking them from a play, because I had the opportunity of working with some fantastic Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal actors, people like Justine Saunders, Lillian Crombie, you know, Kevin Smith, you know, some of the really great luminaries of actors. And there's some fantastic actors over in West Australia too, extraordinary. I've actually worked with the name Lisa. Can't remember her name. Too many plays, too many actors. But having worked with those,
Lisa Kudrow, is that
no, it's not Kudrow. It's Aboriginal actor.
Oh, really? Oh no! Forget I said that.
Sorry, no, she's an Aboriginal actor. Anyway,
I've just been corrected, and that was way off.
Don't worry,
I apologise,
darling. It's fine. It's all fine. Yeah. So I'd worked with those actors really closely. When you work with actors on a new play, they get to workshop the play a little bit with you, and they will give you different lines, and you can either accept them or reject them, or a lot of the time you reject them because it's just not good enough. But I was able to get some really good kind of Aboriginal intonation from particular areas, because you know, I live in the city, well, I used to, and but the actual voices were really right there from when I wrote that play, because I was working with Aboriginal students at University of Sydney, the Corey Centre, and we used to do a lot of. I was a drama teacher. We used to do a lot of improvisations. And so I have to take my hat off to all those women, mostly women, but some men, who contributed to that. And I actually list quite a lot of people at the beginning of the novel and thank all those aunties. But there were a lot of students too, Aboriginal students who I work with, and without them, they wouldn't have that vivid authenticity. Yeah.
So in that process, so when you say that they fed you lines, so they're coming and embodying the character and feeding you what they think the character would say. Is that what you mean by that?
Well, improvisation is that you set up
improvising.
And we were creating a play which was based around a debutante ball, Aboriginal debutante ball, which I've been to several. And I thought, that'll be a nice play, happy play, and there's a football game. But it was right when the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody was going on in Sydney. It was just so happened, it was coincidental. And a lot of the women in the room would go to that, they would go to bear witness to the truth-telling and the restorative justice that could come from that Royal Commission.
Yeah.
And they'd come back so full of the stories they'd heard and so upset and full of emotion that it began to filter through into the drama. And so it went from what was going to be a play about happy family and football match to what happens when a tragedy strikes a family. And so that's kind of why it happened. I didn't set out to write a play about that issue, but it happened.
Yeah. So Madukka, it's a complex crime story that discusses a whole host of important themes. I've got them listed here and there. I'm sure there's more than what I listed, but climate change, environmental disaster, death in custody, corruption, mental health, addictions, gambling, drug and alcohol, racism. There was grief, love, family, culture. So much was in these 300 pages.
And a lot of Arnott's biscuit.
Yeah, lots of Tim Tams. So,
Monte Carlos and custard creams.
Yeah, exactly. How did you conduct the research for this book with all of these themes, and how did you go about collecting this information, and what was that process like for you?
It's the honourable thing to do when writing about an Aboriginal community that is not your own is to undertake protocols. And that's for a non-Aboriginal person or an Aboriginal person. Just because you're an Aboriginal descent doesn't mean you can go stomping around someone else's country and assume you can pinch their stories. It just doesn't work like that. So I spent a bit of time with some elders from Moree. I know other elders from up the North Coast as well, but also met a wonderful elder in Menindee. Evelyn Bates has spent a lot of time with me just talking about the river and what the river meant to her family. And I went on all the corroborees that were held along the river. All these corroborees.
Oh, wow.
In Warriner and in Moree and in Burke, Walgett, to bring the river back, like the spirit of the river. And there were ceremonies attended by all the local Aboriginal people, Nyempa people, Gamaroi people, Barkindji people, and I had the privilege of being in that flotilla of cars and helping with a lot of the cooking. I did, hate cooking, but we had 100 people to feed, so I did some cooking. But just the spirit of people in each of those communities, how desperately they wanted that river back, just desperately, And just quickly, I'll say, I went into Menindee when we finished talking to Auntie Evelyn. No, not Menindee. We went to Wilcannia because I mentioned Wilcannia in the book.
Yes,
and
you do.
And the river was completely gone. All there was a green, slimy pool with dead animals around it. And I went into the local shop. It was a hot day in 2020, and I wanted a bottle of water. It's just a small shop because they don't have proper supermarkets or anything in Wilcannia, and the black and yellow brand 2-litre bottle of water was $6.95, right? And I came out with that bottle of water in my hand, and I looked at my husband and I said, "How does somebody here, an old lady living on a pension of $350 a week, how does she afford to buy, 4 litres of water a day?" Because when you turned on the tap, the water was yellow. It was like sulfuric acid. It came straight out of the ground from bores. How do you wash a newborn baby when that's the color? You can't.
Yeah.
So and I just got really angry. I thought, why do these really poor communities, especially Aboriginal communities, have to suffer because people, greedy kind of corporations, take all the water up the top end of the river? And it just seemed just terrible. And so
unconscionable.
Unconscionable. And I know these things happen all over the world, but it doesn't make them right. And but that was the kind of research I did. And those are the kind of protocols you need to do, which is to go out and talk to communities. And I also sent the manuscript off to some elders who I don't know if they read it. I don't know if they even liked it, but I did the right thing. And that's how I came about.
Yeah. So were there parts of the research for these different things, like when you're doing all of this, what was something that you most enjoyed about about that work?
Well, I'm a bit awful because you name all those very, very serious things, but I've got quite a sense of humour, and most Aboriginal women have, and Aboriginal men have. Shocking, in fact, the women just so naughty, really, really naughty people, and
Wonderful.
funny, yeah, and just funny. Mostly just woman to woman, just kind of naughty jokes or just between us kind of thing. And so I wanted to capture that sense of humour. I mean, a lot of elders I knew, some of them, quite a few of them have passed away. They just say, just laugh with us, dear. If you cry, you'll never stop crying. You just have to laugh with us. And so I tried to depict that kind of sense of humour, even in the opening. I love actually the couple of opening first pages. I wouldn't mind reading a little bit of it if you've got time.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I think I set the tone then a bit kind of tongue-in-cheek for parts of the novel. Then other parts, I don't pull any punches, especially when it's an old lady talking about a massacre or something. I actually just tell it how it is. And it's a bit of something left over from the theatre. You make them laugh and you make them cry,
Yes, yeah.
And that's how you get your audience to listen. Listen to restorative justice and a moral to the story.
Yeah, and that's so true. It comes through really strongly, actually, in all of the relationships with the women. Would you agree with that sense of humour is really there and alive? Yeah, Merle and June. Merle and June. With Auntie Mary. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, when they get ready for the ball, and and
they're so cheeky.
They stuff tissues down their bras and things like it. You're going to go out and wiggle it tonight, or just naughty,
talk
silly.
About chasing men, and it's
silly,
wonderful.
Silly.
Yeah.
But I made June. I decided to create her as a single woman because I just thought she could have a bit more fun.
Yeah.
Right. Than the married woman, where I think respectability always gets us.
Yes.
My dear mother once said in one of my earlier books, I had a character who was single, but it was based on a time I spent in the Northern Territory in a remote school called the Crocodile Hotel. And my mother, I went to one of her book clubs where all the ladies, the average age was about 80, and a lot of people in walking frames and things. And my mother stood up and said, I want to introduce my daughter, Julie, who's written a book about being a teacher, working with Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory. Mum was English, right, in the Northern Territory. And there's a lot of sex in that book and none of it's true. She said she was a very respectable married woman at the time. But I kind of learned a bit from Mum that if you wanted to make someone not particularly respectable, then you better make her a single woman who's enjoying life.
That's right. Mum approves. Yeah, that's right. So how did it feel then for you? Because this is your first crime novel as such. How did that feel? Because you've also written a lot of poetry and, of course, your plays.
Yeah.
So what was that experience like going into writing crime?
Well, I had to get books on how to write a crime novel because I didn't really know. And you can Google up, how to write a crime novel. And I joined Sisters of Crime, and I didn't really do any. I didn't really, mind you, it was through the lockdown and everything. I didn't really do any online courses. Maybe I should have, but I did read a lot of books. I'm a big reader. I mean, I read all the time.
Yeah.
I've always got a book. I've got piles of books by my bed. And if you don't read, you can't write. I mean, it's just as simple as that. If you're not a reader, you're never going to be a writer. So just give up.
Yes.
And so all these books had these tropes and rules that you had to follow. And one of the first rule of crime writing was start with a body.
And I was like, I've heard that before.
Because you think of Vera on telly, and start with a body. And I thought, and I had this family that I loved, that I'd created in the 80s. It's based on real people that I really love, real Aboriginal people. And I
can't kill any of them.
That's right. I couldn't kill any of them. So I invented a nephew that disappears. And the bikies are involved, etc. But maybe I could read it a bit at the beginning. Do you want me to do that?
I would absolutely love that. Would you like to do that now before we continue on some more? Since we were just talking about that would work really well because we've just talked about that.
Yeah.
Would everyone like that now? Oh yes, please, Julie, if you'd like to read some.
Just a short piece. I think when people read too long, it just gets really boring. So, okay, chapter 1, 26th of January, Survival Day. A crow picking at eye sockets in a sheep's skull was a reminder of how outback country towns were shrivelling up. A desert landscape shone red and grey against the Darling River. The dusty desolation of Nyempa country, benevolent colonialism. A town beside a stinking green river of dead fish. The ash-filled streets smelt of bushfire, the air heady with barbecued animals. A town where most of the shops had iron mesh grills, chains, and big locks. Auntie June had completed her TAFE course in investigative services. She proudly showed the Certificate 3 in a nice frame on the wall. It had taken 30 hours online. Her office was in the main street. It used to be Vince's Video Rental, and people still dropped overdue items down the hatch. The latest had been Midnight Cowboy. She cleaned the window with a wet-ex and swept the footpath out front. The handwritten sign stuck on the window announced, Yanakiri Investigation Services, confidentiality guaranteed. The name meant to run fast, as most people she chased were doing that. There were no clients except occasional Murray women wanting June to track cheating husbands or men who'd run off to escape child support payments. The women didn't pay much, nothing in fact, except the occasional kangaroo leg still covered in grey fur. To illustrate her thoughts, when June opened the fridge just now to get some milk, blood dripped onto the lino floor. She locked the office door and stepped outside to take in some hot air. Many other businesses stood empty along the road, most with for sale signs. The failing economy had gutted the biggest hotel. It sat there now with blackened walls, graffiti and glassless windows. Next door to June's office sat the original Commonwealth Bank, a majestic sandstone building displaying a fly-blown notice on the door. This bank has been closed to improve customer service. Where is she? Customer service. The local gungy, Police Sergeant Bruce Blackett, pulled up outside June's office in his wagon and sneered. He was in his 60s with a paunch and thinning grey hair over skin cancers. His black R.M. Williams riding boots were non-uniform issue, convenient for kicking someone. Blackett admired himself in the rearview mirror and picked his teeth with a match. June stuck out her chin and oozed annoyance while the copper looked over her broad golden face, pink lips, tall frame and skinny legs. She knew she was a healthy-looking 50-year-old beauty with white teeth, a freshwater Gamelroy Aboriginal woman born of the clay plains, dust and kangaroos. Blackett pointed at the office sign and hooted. He hung his arm out the window and slapped the driver's door. He sounded very amused. Investigated any major crimes lately, like a murder or a diamond heist, or just some Murray kid pinching a packet of Arnott's custard creams, said Blackett. Cert 3 in investigative services. Jesus wept. June held up a middle finger. He drove off laughing.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
I like Auntie June.
She's, what an amazing character. And she's so strong through the whole book, from those first few pages right to the very end. And she is constantly up against things, and not just from police or from corporations or things like that. It's also within. Sometimes people in the community were like, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
You know, what are you doing? And a few comments were also made. I did write them down in my book. Let's see. I wrote stuff down about Auntie June. There were so many characters in this too that I did actually have a page for each character and took notes on them, because it was great.
You're very good.
I didn't want to miss things, but I did love, actually this is something I totally loved off the topic, but I loved on page 143 when Auntie June says, we see the future and it's all female.
Yes, that's right.
Loved that.
Well, when I was writing, it was part of the Me Too, time as well, because, we were all locked down for so long and went on and on and on.
Yeah.
And I wrote quite a lot of poetry about women's rights in those days, along with other female poets. We'd have this in bed with female poets once a month. We'd all get into bed in our underwear and read poetry to each other that we'd written the week before. And we wrote some really fantastic poems, so a lot of them very quite naked. I think poetry is a good way to start if someone wants to begin writing, because poetry really makes you kind of compress your ideas into short very short, compressed lines and images, and it hones your skills to be either a playwright or a novelist or a screenwriter for that matter, writing for film. So that
to really conserve words, because I find I really struggle with that. I end up getting too fluffy and flowery and go on a bit, and it's good to condense and really conserve the words.
Condense down, and you'll get the essence of what it is you're trying to say.
Yeah. Well, despite there being 300, words in this book and so many themes and things going on, everything was meant to be there. Nothing was out of place. Everything came together. It supported the narrative. It was really, really well done. And I'll circle back to what I was saying about June before, but I just wanted to say this. How did you keep track of everything? Because there were a lot of different plots going on. There were a lot of different themes that were raised and answers needed to be delivered.
Yeah. Well, you sent me the question.
How did you structure?
You sent me the question, was I a plotter? Because, they say, are you a plotter or a planner?
Plotter or a plan,
Well, a pantser. A pantser. You do it by the seat of your pants. Well, usually I'm a pantser. I just I do a lot of research and I leap in. And with my historical novels, I definitely do that.
Pantser for this one?
Definitely. You got it. That's the pantser. But of course, I did have a lot of historical information, so I'm hanging it off the historical information. So it's
it's
not quite like just getting in there, letting your imagination go wild. I'm not so good at that. I tend to think you get off track a bit. And anyway, but I did have the play as the center of this novel, Madukka the River Serpent, and so I already had the characters and I had their relationships. And I had Uncle Jack, I had Sergeant Blackett, and I felt like they were old friends I'd known for a very long time, including Sergeant Blackett, who I know is a racist, horrible man, but I kind of love him anyway because he's kind of he's a man of his generation. I mean.
He certainly loves his community. He might not be a nice,
he's definitely
amicable person, but he loves his community and he loves his job.
Yeah, he writes. But he wrote a poem about the Ningen flood.
Exactly. Yeah, that was amazing.
So I try to make characters that are complex and not too, I don't like Indigenous novels where all white people bad, all Aboriginal people good. I mean, I'm like, are you in the real world? Really, human beings, no matter what our background, we're complex mixtures of all sorts of things. A lot of us have got things that we're ashamed of in our lives and things that we're proud of. And that's just humanity. So I like to try to reflect on humanity. But I had to write a book where there was some restorative justice. I'm really big on the yes vote at the moment, doing a lot of talks in town for, talking about Makarrata and a voice to Parliament and also truth-telling, a reconciliation commission. And they're important things to me. And I think anyone who reads my books would understand that.
Yeah. So to circle back to what I was saying about Auntie June before, it's, because early on in the book, it's noted that she, and how did you actually phrase it, that she lives uptown. She's not part of the reserve. She's got a bit of a better house.
Yeah. Well, in New South Wales, they call them uptown blacks.
Right.
Or coconuts. Black on the outside, white on the inside.
Right.
You may not have those terms over there in West Australia.
Yeah.
Or maybe,
Lamingtons? I think a term Lamington is used.
All right,
so she's dealing with these sorts of things as well, and she's certainly really loved and respected in her community, but nonetheless these sorts of things still come up.
Of course,
she's feeling right the way through the novel, she's feeling like she has to, I don't know, is it like she has to prove, what do you think Auntie June is feeling through the novel? I felt like it's like I don't think she feels like she has to prove anything because she knows who she is, but I'm contradicting myself. But do you know what I mean? There's something, she's a really strong woman, but she's still trying to push through these assumptions of her.
But also she's a woman and a single woman.
Yeah.
And like she has that little liaison with Bundi.
Bundi, is that how you pronounce it? Bundi,
Bundi.
Yeah.
And Bundy, but I'd say Bundi. And Bundi means Bundi stick over here. That means stick you hit people. Yeah. And anyway, but she as the novel progresses, she realizes he's really kind of in bed with the devil. Like he's working with, you know, government officials and the local council, Mr. Wright, and she's beginning to see that he's possibly corrupt. And so, you know, sometimes women and men find themselves in a relationship with someone who ends up to be not what they thought they were. And it can be embarrassing almost to yourself to realize that you know, that you were involved with someone who's actually a complete, you know, cad, you know, not a good person. So I wanted to build that level of June, you know, it wasn't all happy live. And also in the original writing of the novel, I had a lot of background about June, why she didn't have a child, she'd lost the child and all this kind of stuff. And then in the end, I thought, no, I'm just going to cut to the chase. I'm going to concentrate on the one main narrative, which is about the family and the corruption in the town. And also, you know, I got to invent some really new characters like Bam Bam and Cowboy. And they were based on some bikies I've known over my life. Not intimately, but I do observe people. I do, you know, I watch them and I do hear what they say. And if you gather all those little nuggets up and you keep them away in your brain, they can come in handy when you go to write a character.
Exactly. Bam Bam was really complex, wasn't he? It was actually really confronting the fact that he had been a cadet cop and he had and also that he, you know, as he exists, you know, as he does now in the book, that he's doing these drug deals, dealing meth, you know, keeping company with all these things. But also he's sending his children to really good private schools. He's really full on about them getting an education. He wants his reputation to be protected, to look after his children.
I just put that in. I just thought that
but it worked. It really worked. Yeah, absolutely. He was well-rounded. And there were points where I kept feeling like he might redeem himself. What did people think? Because I found that he was just horrible, 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 horrible. And then something, I was like, wow, he might actually kind of redeem himself here. Horrible, horrible, horrible. You know, it was a really interesting roller coaster of Bam Bam.
I'm pleased, because when I first began writing, he was just plain horrible, you know. But, you know, you think, you know, if you've had a long and interesting life, which I have, and I think that goes to the fact I've got quite an adventurous spirit. I went and lived in Arnhem Land. I went and lived in Burke. I've lived in Indonesia. I've travelled all over the world. I've written plays in Indonesia and performed them in Indonesia, and also in the United States. Stayed in Navajo communities in the United States. If you kind of push yourself to have an interesting life, you're going to meet some really interesting characters. And a lot of those little ideas and snippets come into your mind when you're beginning to create something, and I think you draw on them, like various things that happen with Bam Bam, you know, his caravan in the bush and Cowboy growing dope in the bush. Well, we found that one of the local bikies had planted a crop on our little bit of land we've got down the river here. We were like, oh, not quite what we wanted, you know. And, you know, but, you know, he was a nice bloke. I mean, often these people, they say don't crap in your own backyard, you know. They're often quite nice to neighbours, and they're the guy you get over to shoot the black snake that's got into your laundry, you know, like you know, or dig the cow out that's got, you know, it's not your cow, but it's up to its waist in mud just outside your shack on the river. They'll come and dig it out and sit with it all night and get the vet out and pay $300 for the vet to look at a cow that nobody even owns. And you go, just, you know, what? What? They'll also beat up their wife and put her in hospital. So, you know, human beings, we're very complicated.
So with these characters, I found that there was a really interesting and important contrast between the way that the young community and the older community were depicted. So we see, you know, like June, Merle, and Auntie Mary, understandably, are far more cautious and wary when dealing with figures of authority. You know, they are constantly. Well, Auntie Mary kind of doesn't want a bar of things. She just really wants to stick to herself, to her world on the reserve. You know, Merle and June, definitely will go up against things, but they'll be very cautious of how they choose how they do things.
Yeah.
And then we see the likes of the younger generation. We see Arana, am I saying that right?
Arana. Yeah.
Arana, Steve and Tomo have got their phones out and they're filming cops and they're keeping evidence and they're archiving things and they're putting things on social media and they're contributing to this riot. And
well,
it was an amazing contrast.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I wrote that play back in the 80s. And so when I first began to write it, I was going to put it in the 80s. And I thought, no, I'll make it modern. And, the first editor said, well, if it's modern, why isn't anyone using a mobile phone?
Using a phone,
or using Instagram or TikTok or anything? And I'm like, oh, dear, all right, okay. So I had to go through. But it was fun because then I had Arana, she's got a phone in the car and she says to Uncle Jack, don't disturb me, Uncle Jack, I'm blogging. And he says, well, why don't you put your ass out the window?
Yeah.
It's like, because you've got that generational kind of, not really understanding each other.
Yeah. God, Uncle Jack was wonderful, wasn't he? He was so good. So, I think
a lot of Aboriginal families, and I'm sure other families too, have got a drunk uncle or an uncle who's mentally ill or an auntie who's mentally ill. I mean, let's face it, every family. I mean, my brother had schizophrenia. I mean, mental illness just kind of follows people around these days. And I wanted Uncle Jack to, a couple of times in books, I've had a character who's mentally ill, and I kind of honour my brother who passed away very early in his life, when he was 50, honour him for his eccentricity and strangeness. But that that even people with a mental illness can have something to offer their families and society, and we love them despite their illness if we can. It's not always possible. I mean, my brother was dangerous, extremely dangerous. So, that was terrible for my mother. But,
I feel like I can sort of relate to what you're saying there, but in a different sort of context. I have a brother, Jackson, who is on the autistic spectrum and has Down syndrome, and he's the love of my life. He's such a great young man.
Yeah.
But we as a family feel like we're just so blessed to get a window into Jackson's perspective of things, because he engages with his environment on such a different level and notices such different things and is hilarious and cynical about things that I probably wouldn't have even noticed. And
it's all that. Well, that's why I wanted towards the end of the novel, and once again, I don't want to give too much away about the end, but I have Uncle Jack have his little moment, because it's often, if you're a good novelist, you'll bring every character to some kind of cathartic moment where we understand their arc. And I hadn't really had anything for Uncle Jack, and I thought Uncle Jack will have this kind of revelation in the storm, and be I like to give everybody their little moments so that they can so there's a bit of hope too. I don't like
absolutely
people walking away from a novel feeling like, oh, life's terrible and I don't want to be here anymore. I mean, I've suffered from mental illness, and I was at a writers event recently, and I talked a little bit about that, and later on a woman came up to me and she said, I'm so grateful that you talked about depression. She said, because it's haunted me all my life. And I said, well, if we don't talk about these things, it'd be like back in the old days where it's all just stuck, something to be ashamed of. And it's just an illness, then you have to just you deal with it, and there's good ways of dealing with it. And if it comes up in the novel, I always answer the question. I think you've got to be honest about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's kind of honouring humanity as well, isn't it? The whole aspect of the experience. Yeah. No. Yep. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask Julie before I continue with my list? No. All pretty happy with the glasses of wine and happy to listen.
Oh, you lucky things.
Yeah.
If I'm doing something work-wise, I don't have a glass of wine. I wait till after.
Yeah.
Just have one.
I'd love to talk about the female characters in the novel. I know we've talked about them a lot now, but I think it's just beautiful to notice constantly that this just beautiful ebb and flow of the different generations, the real intergenerational perspective of what the community is experiencing environmentally, culturally, and I just wanted to, it's not even a question I've got here, it's just kind of a bit of a statement. I was just hoping we could just riff a bit about the women and their...
I always make women the centre of my novels.
Yes.
I did write one novel which had a young Australian girl who was not Aboriginal, called The Lighthouse Ghost, which was about my husband's mother over in West Australia. But I normally write Aboriginal characters, and the women are always in the centre. I mean, when I went to university, I was the first person in my family to go to university, and I studied English. And I was horrified that all the books they gave us, the only female author they gave us was Jane Austen. Every other author of like 100 books, all of them were by men. And I find, and there's a lot of male writers I really admire, like Jock Sarong's a fantastic writer. He's a friend of mine. And, you know, some wonderful Indigenous writers. You've got Kim Scott over in West Australia. He's a fantastic writer. But I actually really sing when I read female writing. It just feels like they're inside me, and so I always put a female protagonist. And I wanted a mature woman this time, because in my other novels I've often got a woman who's young, or it's like a coming of age thing, which is fine. But I just thought, Julie, look in the mirror. You know, you're not getting any younger. And I had so many mature Aboriginal friends, women, aunties, who really hold their communities together in a way that is just extraordinary. And I wanted to celebrate older women and what we do, you know, and what we achieve, because so often they're left out of the narrative, or they're a butt of jokes. And I think it's time to turn that narrative around. Yeah.
I think there were also some beautiful moments between June and her sister-in-law, Merle, Merle, sorry, beg your pardon, where it almost felt like they were timeless, or they'd gone back to being young girls, or they just were timeless, like these moments where they just were caressing each other or doing each other's hair, or just these gentle moments all throughout the book, which really, really actually helped me progress through, because we were discussing it a bit earlier, actually. It's such a good book, and I'm so glad I read it, but it was not an easy book to read. There's a lot in it, and because it's, you know, this is actually happening, it cuts too close to the core. This is truth. It's very painful, and on many different levels. So it was really beautiful to have these beautiful relationships unfolding as alongside.
Yeah, well, it's I don't have any sisters, but I've got a really good sister-in-law who often reads the early drafts of my novels. And she's completely different to me. She's very sophisticated and city-ish, you know, and I'm not like that at all. But she's wonderful, and I'm very grateful to have her. And I think those relationships between women, you know, sister-like relationships, or some mother and a daughter relationship, you know, the Kath and Kim, you know, relationship. You know, is very fulfilling for us, you know, as women. And once again, something we don't always celebrate, but I really like Merle, and Merle's a bit more nervy than Auntie June, not quite so brave, and you know, and when they've got to do something like they're going around to, you know, beat up Bam Bam, for God's sake. Based on a true story from this town. You know, the Aboriginal women getting out of a car with the bundi sticks and beating a bloke up.
It was incredible. It was incredible, that scene.
Molesting one of the women, and they just they beat him up. They didn't care about the police or anything. They wanted their own kind of their own justice, because they knew they wouldn't get it from the police. I'm not advocating that. I'm just observing it. That's all.
Yes.
I think, you know, obeying the law is a pretty important thing to do. Otherwise, it's all anarchy. But I like that. I like those Kath and Kim moments where they sit there and say, you know, I have another Tim Tam, go and have two.
Yeah, and something about when they were getting ready for the Deb ball, and June's dress is a bit tight, and Merle is kind of, you know, saying, oh, you know, you can't, too many Tim Tams, and she's like, oh well, it's curvy and I feel good, and it was great.
And a bloke likes something to hang on to.
Exactly, that's it. A bloke likes something to hang on to.
Terrible, really. Anyway.
I wonder, did you have any other ideas for any of the characters that kind of didn't make the final cut? Were you going to take any of them in different directions?
No, I don't think so. Because what happened was, because I had this very narrow range from this play,
Yeah.
is that I had them very set in my mind who they were, but I needed a lot of more incidents to create a novel, and so I began to put them into more and more kind of outrageous situations, which definitely weren't in the play. Like the scene where June goes to the pub and she overhears the bikies having a chapter meeting, and they're all
Yeah.
and I've seen a chapter meeting of bikies down by the river where we often go, where we've got this little shack. They're all sitting there in their underpants and they're roasting some animal on thing, and they're all drinking beer, and it's 9 o'clock in the morning, and I just like, what, and
Yeah.
and
Unrelatable.
and
Yeah.
you're trying to just get in the swimming hole and have a swim, and you think, well,
Yeah.
I won't go naked today.
Yeah.
And they're friendly, they're nice blokes and everything, but they're actually really, really dangerous people, who kill people, and so I wanted June to kind of face up to people like that. And there's a scene where she's in the pub, and I think Bam Bam comes over, or no, it's actually the other guy, the ice guy, comes
The
over
Iceman, yeah.
and puts some chili and pepper and stuff in her drink and tells her to drink
Bits
it.
in her drink, and
Yeah,
yeah.
I had that happen to me when I was a very young woman.
Oh.
In a pub once. Went out with this bloke, and it was, sometimes in life you look back and there are certain moments in your life where, one, you can keep them for a novel, and two, where you just have this light bulb goes on and goes, I've got to get out of here. So I just said,
Yeah.
I'm just going to the toilet. I went over towards the toilet, wait till he wasn't looking, and I sit straight out and got in a taxi and went home, and never answered another phone call again. You've got to be able to read those dangerous signals. Yeah.
I absolutely loved reading that, that she just tipped the drink out.
Yeah.
I loved it. Like
Yeah.
when I was reading that passage, I was like, oh, this is horrible. How is she going to get out of this?
Yeah.
I'm really sorry to say it didn't occur to me to just tip the drink out and leave. And she did. And I was so proud of her. I was like, yes, that's excellent. Like I really felt that intimidation as I was reading it.
Yeah.
And
well,
what is she going to do?
I think because she'd lost a member of the family, and I really think June really felt she had nothing to lose,
Yes.
And she was a single woman. She didn't have any of her own children. She'd lost the only one that she really loved, who she helped look after, and she just got to the point of going, nothing will stop me in this investigation. She would have, she was just going to fight through to the end, no matter what it did to her, including being in a riot where she ended up, being picked up by the police. She didn't care anymore. She just wanted justice. Yeah.
So I found it a really satisfying ending, but I think maybe I shouldn't have used that word. I did put on Facebook on our page today that I found it a satisfying ending, but there isn't actually overall satisfaction to be drawn from this, because the river did flood, but that didn't change the situation. Like the water would end up going with the irrigators, or the fish have not too long ago, fish have died. There's been mass
in Menindee again. It's full of dead fish. There's millions and millions of dead fish. The river, the Darling River, is dead. It can't maintain any aqua life anymore. It'll end up being a ditch where the water just flows from the top to the bottom. It's a great ecological tragedy, which I don't think it'll ever be undone. Anyway, it makes me too depressed thinking about it.
Exactly. So I think, and it's not that I felt, it's not a satisfying ending in that sense, but I think with what happens with a couple of particular characters at the end, you feel moments of justice, not the justice that is deserved, but there are moments of justice. Yeah.
Well, I think the idea with a crime novel is you've got to keep people hanging on, and maybe the next time I write one, I'll be a bit better at that, because it is a skill. You're developing different tropes of what the crime genre is, of making people turn the page. The tension of not knowing what is going to happen is a pretty important part of being a crime writer, and I might get better at it in the next novel, but I want people to keep reading it, and unexpected things happen, because
So are you saying that felt challenging to you because you knew the state of the Darling River and that you can't have a resolution there. Is that what you mean by that?
I think in some ways the Darling River became a backdrop for the human drama, but I do say the human drama was a metaphor for the river as well.
Yes,
But then, of course, you get caught up in the human characterizations. And I mean, even I really enjoyed writing, you know, Constable Johnson, you know.
Yes.
You know, Wayne, and Wayne getting a bit of a crush on Arana, you know.
Oh, and he was so young and just so naive and just love-struck.
You know, he's trying to do the right thing.
So hard. Yeah, he was turned up with a sponge cake. What? Like, that was perfect. It was perfect for that character. But I just was like, what are you thinking? Like, he just didn't know how to... He didn't know how to say, I'm sorry, I love you. Yeah.
Oh, I know. Well, you know.
It was beautiful.
We've all known Waynes in our life, you know.
Yeah.
You know, awkward and I, you know, I mean, I put a bit of sex in the novel, you know, because I always think it's part of humanity. But I'm a little bit wary because the first novel I wrote, there was a bit of it in it as well. And I walked into, when I moved to this country town, I walked into the local pub, which is more like a club, but it's really cute. I walked in, the publicans, he knew who I was. Someone had told him who I was. I walked in, and he said to the entire pub, which is only about 20 people, "Here's Julie Janson. She's the woman who writes dirty books." Oh. And I was like, no, that book was about land rights.
Yeah.
And so after that, I was a bit like, oh, you know, I've got to be a bit careful about this because, you know, well, I mean, I can laugh about it now, but when I read Benevolence, I didn't put any of that kind of material in it at all. And the editor, Rachel Ben Salah, she said, Julie, there's something missing from Benevolence. And I thought, oh, yes, what is it? You know, I've done so much editing. And she said, well, there's no scene where the baby is conceived. And I said, oh, well, can't we just, you know, draw the curtain, you know, romantic music or something? And she said, no, we want the scene. And I thought, all right, I'll write you a sex scene, you know. But I was reluctant, you know.
Yeah.
But you get a bit of it. Well, I had blokes walking up to me in the pub and nudging me and going, what pages should I read?
Yeah. Oh my God.
Like, read the whole novel. You might learn something.
Yeah. Context. Yeah.
So, you know, you do learn a few, you know, things not to do.
It was definitely a page turner, Madukka.
Oh, good.
It definitely was. I didn't mean to give you the impression that it wasn't with the ending. I just meant that it was so real. It was very, very poignant. Yeah.
Well, you know, make them laugh, make them cry.
Yeah.
But also, I did break the trope of a crime novel. One of the rules of crime writing is that you don't have anything supernatural, right? Now, I knew when I wanted to write an Aboriginal crime novel with an Aboriginal protagonist, I knew that was absolutely not possible because in the world of Aboriginal families and life is that we all believe in spirits. Not only spirits of the earth, but actual functioning ghosts that live in your house or grandma hasn't left or, you know, just as part of actual every single day reality. And so I had to include, you know, some ghost elements. And I thought, oh, well, the crime genre is just going to have to realise that that's an important part of Aboriginal life. But also, you know, like the Chinese people, for instance, the spirit world's very important for American Indian people and, you know, a lot of people, Irish people, the spirit world. No.
Yeah, exactly. But as a cross-cultural read, like for myself, I really found the way that you've depicted the spirituality in the book hugely accessible, and it was absolutely a part of it. No, that's right. I don't know if you could hear that.
No,
it was a normal sense. It was experienced as a normal sense, and it didn't feel supernatural. It felt a part of that landscape, and
Well, because at the beginning when June hears the scratching on the window, it's often you know, I mean, when my father died, I kept having dreams that because I was only 18, that he kept coming to the door and knocking on the door and wanting to come in, and I'd open the door and he'd be standing there covered in blood because he died in it. And I had those dreams again and again and again. And it was like a ghost was coming to the door wanting to come in. And it absolutely, ripped my heart out. But it's as though those dreams were the manifestations of a spirit. But whether or not psychologists would say, oh, it was just grief or whatever. But for me, it was a spiritual, knocking on the door.
Yeah. So in preparation for this evening, I watched on YouTube a 2020 Indigenous Literacy Day session that you had with Zoe Sims of Koskela. I'm actually not too sure what Koskela is. It was to do with the I'm not sure what
I think it's encouraging writing, Indigenous writing.
Right,
encouraging young people to read.
Yeah. So you were discussing your novel Benevolence with Zoe, because that had come out around that time. In that interview, Zoe asked you a really great question. She asked, what was one key message that you wanted readers to take away from this novel? And I watched that before I read Madukka. And your answer was resilience and determination to defend country and to defend your rights to survive. And so after having watched that YouTube, I had that in my head, even though it was relating to this book, I had that in my head reading Madukka, and I felt that really applied. That message continues strongly in this work. Do you feel like that's the message with this book, or what message is it that you are wanting people to take away from this book?
It is resilience and survival, but this book in particular is about protecting our rivers, standing together, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, protecting our landscape, protecting our land, protecting our waterways in particular. And just, we've got climate change, doing everything we can to, I got a recent payment for some books. I don't, you don't make much money as a writer, and I'm suddenly beginning to make a little bit. The first thing I did was change from gas, got rid of all the gas in the house and put in one of those stove tops that's just the induction stove top. And then I got a heat pump, which just kind of means you only use a tiny bit of electricity, and put on a whole lot of solar panels. And we're pretty well off grid, and we live in town. I just, I didn't want to buy a fancy car. I didn't want to buy fancy clothes or go on a cruise or anything. God, I can think of nothing worse. But I did want to just do my part in my own little way. So it's that thing about making people realize that we're all here together. We've got to make this planet survive. But
exactly.
For our children. For our children and grandchildren.
Sorry, what was that?
For our children and grandchildren.
Yes, absolutely.
Or our surrogate children. I've got a lot of friends who don't have biological children, but their nieces and nephews and their surrogate children.
Yep, exactly. Tomo gave his life for exactly that purpose. He'd said to Ducky that he has his child and he just wants his child to be able to enjoy the river. He wants his child to be able to have that source. Yep. Does anyone have any questions for Julie before I wrap things up? No?
Did they know I'm coming to West Australia? I'm going to the Margaret River Writers Festival.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. So the Margaret River Writers Festival, so that's around the 14th, 13th and 14th, 12th, 13th and 14th, I think.
And I'm also at the Melville Library, wherever that is. Where is the Melville Library? West Australian, where is that? Melville. Yes. Melville Library, Civic Centre, Melville, Burruberongal. Anyway, whatever. And I'm also at the Rabble Book and Games on the 10th, Wednesday, the 10th of May at 6 p.m.
Yeah. So,
I'm not sure where that is. I don't know Perth well enough.
So it's amazing that you'll be over here. How long are you over here for?
I'm over here for 10 days. The Margaret River have been really good. They've given me a car so I can get from Perth down to Margaret River. They've been very kind, and I'll meet up with some of the people from Muggabala. They'll come over because they're publishing my next book, which is called Compassion, and it's a follow-up to Benevolence. But it's in first person with a female protagonist who's based on my 2 times great grandmother, who stole 9 fowls. First time she was up in court. The second time she stole a herd of cattle, and the third time she stole a herd of horses. So I decided I had to write.
Wow.
I know very little about her except those court cases, and she got off every time. And I thought she had the gift of the gab, which our family does have.
Yeah.
And so I've written a novel about her, which is quite a long novel, but I'm very proud of it. Mugabulla are going to bring it out early next year. Compassion, it's called.
Compassion.
Mm.
Well, we'll have to have you with the book club again then.
Thank you. I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to talk to the library and see if we can't convince you to come down this way when you're over in WA.
Okay. Well, I'll be getting there fairly soon. I think I'm there in 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's only like a couple of weeks away, isn't it?
Yeah. Good. I love WA. We did this most amazing trip to Kalgoorlie and Albany and Esperance. We did a couple of.
Will you be coming down to Albany?
Well, we did a writer's talk in Albany Library last time we were down about 5 years ago, and it was just so delightful because people, they're so keen, everyone's kind of,
Absolutely.
don't get enough writers. I think
no, that's exactly right.
Yeah, I think it's too far for me this time. My health hasn't been great. I had a fall the other day, so I mostly won't make it to Albany this time. But
okay.
I do love West Australia, and when Mugabulla brings out Compassion next year, I'll definitely be coming across, and I'll definitely come to Albany.
Yes.
Well, my husband's a surfer, and we got down to Albany. We couldn't see anyone in the surf. We looked at each other and went, "Oh, we know why."
Yeah.
We remembered why.
Yeah. Sharks and it's cold.
Oh God, yeah. Anyway, but it's very, very beautiful. Very.
Yeah, it's stunning. Yeah.
Beautiful town.
Well, Julie, this has been an amazing book to read. The whole club has really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for writing this work.
Thank you.
It's a really strong message, and I really think everyone should read this book.
Great. And it might be a 4-part series. It might be a TV series.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah, possibly. It's in the.
That would be awesome.
That
would actually be awesome.
There's some discussions. I always go, oh yeah, sure, because I'm too busy writing novels to worry about it. But it's certainly on the card. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being with us this evening, giving us your time, and really look forward to reading Compassion when that comes out. And enjoy your time in WA. Have a wonderful time when you come across for the Writers' Festival.
I will. Well, if any of you come down to Margaret River, come up and tap me on the shoulder and say hello. I'm very approachable. I'm usually the person sitting in the corner talking to the oldest lady in the room. So come up and say hello. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Big round of applause for Julie. Thank you so much, Julie.
Thanks very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.